Bang, bang, bang. Open this gate, I'm late. That's how my Monday kicked off at the crack of 6 a.m. with the HOA president, Karen Whitfield. Yes, that Karen, hammering on my ranch gate like the world was ending. In my 24 years as a mailman, I'd never locked anyone out of my own land until she came along, and now here I was, caught in the wildest neighbor feud of my life. This is the tale of how one woman called the cops on me 23 times in just 30 days. Nearly once.
A day! Let's rewind 3 months to when I first bought Morning Star Ranch, chasing my lifelong dream.
I'm Tom Anderson, 46, a retired postal worker with a creaky back and a heart set on raising horses in peace. When I signed the papers, the seller gave me one heads up, and it wasn't about the shaky well or the fence tilting to the left. Watch.
Out for Karen, he warned, his grey beard trembling as he spoke.
She's been using the road through here for 20 years, ever since her daughter was little. Good luck getting her to stop. I should have noticed the nervous twitch in his eye when he mentioned her name, but I was too caught up in the thrill of finally owning my dream property to care about some neighbor cutting through on an old dirt road. For the first 2 months, I tried to play the nice guy, I really did. Every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, when Karen roared through in her white Range Rover, I'd stand on my porch, coffee in hand, and toss her a friendly wave. But things were
about to take a turn. Which city of the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you've had any confrontation with the HOA. We'll narrate your story on our channel.
When she brought her book club of 30 women for an impromptu tour of what she called the historic community pathway, I gritted my teeth and smiled. But then things started escalating in ways that would make your head spin. She organized an HOA meeting right in my north pasture, setting up folding chairs and a portable microphone system without even asking. Her Range Rover ran over 3 of my chickens. And when I mentioned it, she looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language and said, "They shouldn't have been in the road." The road that ran through my private property, mind you. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon when I found her leading what looked like a real estate tour through my barn, and this rustic structure, she was telling a group of well-dressed strangers, has been part of our community's heritage since before
any of us were born.
That's when I knew the warnings hadn't been strong enough. This woman didn't just use my road, she acted like she owned it. That evening, I researched property law until my eyes burned. Turns out there was no easement, no right-of-way, no legal, anything that gave her permission to treat my ranch like her personal shortcut. The previous owners had just been too nice or too scared to stop her. Monday morning, I installed a 12T electric gate with a keypad entry system. It wasn't cheap, but it was solid steel, automated, and most importantly, it locked. I felt a little guilty as I tested the remote control, watching it swing shut with a satisfying clang. But that guilt evaporated faster than morning dew in July. When I thought about finding strangers in my barn, about my dead chickens, about the tire tracks through my wildflower meadow, this was my land bought with 24 years of savings from delivering mail in rain, snow, and 100-degree heat. If I wanted to put up a gate, that was my right. Which brings us back to that fateful Monday morning at 6 a.m. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when I heard the first honk, then another. Then the pounding started. By the time I walked outside, still in my pajama pants and old postal service t-shirt, Karen was out of her Range Rover and attacking my gate like it had personally insulted her mother. Her face was the color of a ripe tomato, and her usually perfect blonde hair was already coming loose from its clip. "What is the meaning of this?" she screamed, pointing at the gate with a manicured finger that shook with rage. "I have a board meeting in 20 minutes. I took a slow sip of my coffee before answering, partly because I needed the caffeine and partly because I knew it would drive her crazy. "Morning, Karen. Beautiful day, isn't it?" Her eyes bulged so much I worried they might pop right out of her skull. "Don't you dare mourn me, Tom Anderson. Open this gate immediately. This is a community thoroughfare that has existed since before you were even born." I couldn't help but smile a little at that. "Actually, Karen, this is private property. Has been since 1892, according to the county records. You're welcome to use the public road like everyone else. Only adds about 15 minutes to your drive." That's when she pulled out her phone and dialed 3 numbers that would become very familiar over the next month. 911, yes, this is Karen Whitfield, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I'm being held hostage by a mailman who has illegally blocked a public road. I need officers here immediately. I nearly choked on my coffee, held hostage. She was standing on a public road next to her running vehicle, completely free to leave any time she wanted. But in Karen's world, not getting her way was apparently equivalent to being kidnapped. Sheriff Mike Bradley showed up 15 minutes later, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. I had delivered mail to his house for years, and we'd always gotten along well. He took one look at the situation. Karen still ranting about historic rights and community heritage. Me standing there in my pajamas holding a now cold cup of coffee, and I swear I saw him bite back a laugh. "Morning, Tom. Karen says you're holding her hostage." He said it with such a straight face that I had to admire his professionalism. "Well, Mike, if standing on my own property drinking coffee counts as kidnapping these days, then I guess I'm guilty." Karen practically shrieked. "This isn't funny. He's blocking a road that this community has used for 20 years. I have documentation." But here's the thing about documentation. It only matters if it's real. And as Sheriff Mike patiently explained to an increasingly red-faced Karen, wanting something to be true doesn't make it legally binding. There was no easement on file, no agreement with previous owners, nothing that gave her or anyone else the right to drive through my property without permission. "Ma'am," Sheriff Mike said in that calm voice cops use when they're trying not to escalate things, "Mr. Anderson has every right to fence his property. You'll need to use the county road like everyone else." The sound Karen made wasn't quite human. It was somewhere between a screech and a growl, and it made my horses in the far pasture pick up their heads and snort nervously. As she stormed back to her Range Rover, she turned and pointed at me with that same shaking finger. "This isn't over, Anderson. You have no idea who you're messing with. I've been president of this HOA for 3 years, and I've never lost a battle for this community." Then she peeled out in a spray of gravel, leaving Sheriff Mike and me standing there in the morning sun. Mike sighed and adjusted his hat. "Tom, I've got a feeling this is going to be a long month." Looking back now, that might have been the understatement
of the century, because that first 911 call, that was just day one of what would become the most insane month of my life.
Tuesday morning arrived with a certified letter that required my signature. The mailman, Rodriguez, who'd taken over my old route, gave me a sympathetic look as I signed for it. "Heard about your gate situation," he said quietly. "That woman's... I've been calling the post office too, claiming you're interfering with mail delivery." I had to laugh at that one. In all my years of delivering mail, I'd never once used someone's private driveway as a shortcut. And I told him as much. The letter was exactly what I expected. 3 pages of legal-sounding nonsense on HOA letterhead, demanding I remove my non-conforming structure within 72 hours or face severe consequences. The best part was where she claimed my gate violated the aesthetic standards of the greater Willowbrook community, which was rich considering my ranch wasn't even part of Willowbrook. I spent that afternoon doing what any reasonable person would do. I researched, not just casual Googling, but deep diving into property laws, HOA regulations, and county records that went back over a century. What I found was fascinating and infuriating in equal measure. Not only did the HOA have zero authority over my property, but the historic community pathway Karen kept ranting about had never existed in any legal sense. The previous owners had simply been too polite to tell her no. I even found a survey from 1998 that clearly marked the property boundaries with big, bold letters stating public property no easement right where the dirt road cut through. Wednesday brought escalation in the form of an emergency HOA meeting that Karen called specifically to address what she termed the Anderson situation. My inside source, who shall remain nameless, but who'd lived in Willowbrook for 15 years and was sick of Karen's power trips, sent me screenshots of the neighborhood social media page. Karen had posted a novel-length rant about how I was attacking the very foundation of their community and displaying aggressive antisocial behavior that threatened everyone's property values. The comments section was comedy gold, with about 70% of people pointing out that I wasn't part of their HOA and could do whatever I wanted with my land, while the other 30% seemed to think Karen walked on water. But then something shifted the whole dynamic entirely. As I was reading through the latest batch of increasingly unhinged messages, my daughter Emma knocked on my office door. At 16, she had better tech skills than most adults, and she'd been recording our gate camera footage to her computer just in case we needed it. "Dad, you need to see this," she said, pulling up a video from Monday morning. I was editing the clips for backup when I noticed something weird. She zoomed in on Karen's laptop, which was visible through her car window as she waited at the gate. On the screen, clear as day, was a property deed, but it wasn't my property deed. The name at the top was Whitfield Holdings LLC, and it showed my ranch as part of their property portfolio. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just about convenience or some misguided sense of entitlement. Karen was planning something bigger. I immediately called the county clerk's office and spent 2 hours on hold before finally getting through to someone who could help. No, there was no deed transfer on file. No, Whitfield Holdings LLC didn't own my property. Yes, creating fraudulent property documents was a felony. The clerk suggested I might want to contact both a lawyer and the sheriff's department about potential fraud, but I decided to wait and see what Karen's next move would be. Sometimes in chess and in life, it's better to let your opponent reveal their strategy before you counter. Thursday morning, Karen showed up with what she called a professional surveying team, but looked more like her nephew and his buddy with a measuring tape and a clipboard. They started setting up right at my property line, making a big show of taking measurements and photos. I watched from my porch, coffee in hand, as they discovered that my fence was allegedly 3F'd onto HOA property. The problem with their discovery was that I'd had a real survey done before buying the place, and I had the marked boundary stones to prove where the actual property line was. When Karen triumphantly marched up to my gate, waving their findings, I simply held up my official survey documents through the bars. Nice try, Karen, but actual surveyors use actual equipment. That's when she made a tactical error. In her fury, she let something slip that confirmed my suspicions about that fraudulent deed. "You stupid man!" she hissed, her face once again achieving that impressive tomato color. "Do you have any idea what you're costing me? 20 years I've been setting this up. 20 years. When I asked what exactly I was costing her, she caught herself and switched back to her usual rant about community rights and historic pathways. But the mask had slipped and we both knew it. She called 911 again, claiming I was harassing her by existing on my own property. And poor Sheriff Mike had to come out and explain once again that standing on your own land isn't a crime. By Friday, the calls to emergency services had become almost routine. 9 a.m. Karen would call about my horses being too close to the property line. Noon, she'd report that my gate was blocking emergency vehicle access, never mind that ambulances and fire trucks had their own codes for every gate in the county. 3 p.m. Like clockwork, she'd claim I was creating a public nuisance by refusing her reasonable requests. Sheriff Mike started showing up with a resigned look and a large coffee, and we'd chat about fishing while Karen ranted in the background. You know, he said during visit number 5, in 30 years of law enforcement, I've never seen someone so determined to create a crime where none exists. But the real circus began on Saturday when Emma made another discovery. She'd been going through the footage from earlier in the week when she noticed something odd. Dad, remember when Karen's nephew was here doing that fake survey? Look what he dropped. She zoomed in on a piece of paper that had fallen from his clipboard, even at maximum.
Zoom, we could only make out part of it, but what we could see was damning.
It was an email printout with the subject line "Reawning Star Ranch Acquisition Timeline" and a partial sentence that read, "Must secure access rights before October or the entire development deal." The plot was thickening faster than Karen's file of bogus complaints. That afternoon, as I was repairing a section of fence the surveying team had mysteriously damaged, Emma came running with her laptop. Dad, someone just forwarded me a bunch of emails from the HOA internal discussion board. You're not going to believe this. What I read made everything crystal clear. Karen wasn't just power tripping or trying to preserve some imaginary community tradition. She was in deep negotiations with a development company called Celestial Developments to build a massive resort that would require combining the HOA land with my ranch. The emails showed she'd been promised a $20 million finder's fee if she could deliver both properties as a package. No wonder she was so desperate to maintain access through my land. Without it, the whole deal would fall apart. As I finished reading the leaked emails, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something told me to answer it. Mr. Anderson. The voice was professional, crisp, and somehow familiar. This is Richard Whitfield. I understand you've been having some difficulties with my ex-wife. I think it's time. We had a conversation about what Karen is really up to. The day had just gotten a whole lot more interesting. As I agreed to meet him the next day, I could hear sirens in the distance. Karen had called the cops again, this time claiming I had stolen confidential HOA documents. Sheriff Mike was going to need a bigger coffee. Sunday was supposed to be a day of rest, but Karen had other plans. I woke to find 15 people with matching T-shirts that read, "Save Our Heritage Path," planted outside my gate like they were protesting a nuclear power plant. The signs they carried were even better, with gems like "Free the Road" and "Stop Ranch Tyranny." Karen stood at the front with a megaphone, which seemed like overkill for a group that could have fit in a minivan. "We shall not be moved," she chanted, and her little army repeated it with varying levels of enthusiasm. I did what any reasonable person would do when faced with such ridiculous theatre. I made coffee, grabbed a lawn chair, and set myself up on the porch to enjoy the show. When Karen saw me sit down with my steaming mug, her face went through several interesting color changes. "Are you mocking us?" she screeched through the megaphone. I raised my mug in a friendly toast and called out, "Just enjoying my Sunday morning, Karen. You folks want some water? It's going to be a hot one." And this wasn't the reaction she'd been hoping for, because she immediately started a new chant about property rights that didn't quite rhyme. Things escalated when she unveiled her latest weapon, a drone. Not just any drone, but a professional camera drone that buzzed over my property like an angry mechanical wasp. "I am documenting every single violation on this property," she announced. "Every illegally placed structure, every environmental hazard will be recorded." The drone swooped low over my chicken coop, sending the birds into a squawking frenzy. I pulled out my phone and made sure she could see me recording. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing is the HOA president committing criminal trespass with a drone over private property. Several protesters started looking uncomfortable and quietly slipped away to their cars. By the time Sheriff Mike arrived for what was now his 8th visit in 6 days, he looked exhausted. Tom, Karen, it's Sunday. Can we maybe take a break from whatever this is? Karen launched into her prepared speech about civil rights and community heritage, but Mike just held up his hand. Ma'am, you can protest on public property all you want, but that drone needs to stay on your side of the property line. The look on Karen's face suggested she considered this a very real crime indeed. Monday afternoon brought a blessed break from the madness. Emma had begged me to go fishing at the tank on the back 40. As we sat on the dock watching our bobbers drift, she finally voiced what had been bothering her. Dad, I'm worried about you. This whole thing with Mrs. Whitfield is getting really
weird. I sat down my rod and looked at my daughter. I know it seems crazy, sweetheart, but I promise you, I've got this handled.
Sometimes in life you have to stand up for what's right. She cast her line again, thoughtful. Mom always said you were stubborn, but she said it like it was a good thing. That made me smile. I don't want to fight with anyone, Em, but I can't. Let people walk all over us. This ranch is our home. Tuesday morning, I woke to the sound of heavy machinery. Karen had hired a well drilling company, and they were setting up right at my boundary line. The foreman looked embarrassed when I walked over. Sorry about this, Mr. Anderson. The lady said she needed to find a historic well that proves this was community land, paid us triple our usual rate. I had to laugh at the absurdity, but Karen had made a crucial error. About 2 hours into drilling, there was a sudden crack, followed by a geyser of water shooting 30 FT into the air. They'd hit the old ranch well system that connected to a natural spring. The water flooded the road she was so desperate to use. The irony was delicious. The drilling crew packed up faster than you could say liability insurance, leaving Karen standing in ankle-deep water, shrieking into her phone. This time, she called 911 to report that I had sabotaged her investigation by booby-trapping my property. Sheriff Mike didn't even come out. He just called me directly and said, Tom, please.
Tell me you didn't actually booby-trap your land.
When I explained about the 60-year-old well system, he actually laughed. So she flooded herself. That's karma right there. Wednesday brought new drama when my anonymous source in the HOA sent another message. Emergency meeting tonight. Karen's proposing to annex your ranch into HOA boundaries. She's got a lawyer saying it's possible if they can prove historical community use. Also overheard someone mention Plan B for Friday. Watch your back. I forwarded the message and made a mental note to check all my fences and gates, whatever was coming. I had a feeling the drone and drilling were just the warm-up act. As I watched the sunset that evening, I thought about what Emma had said. Was I being stubborn? Maybe, but sometimes stubborn is just another word for principled. My phone buzzed with another message from the HOA group. This one was different. If Karen can't get your road by Friday, they have a Plan B, and you're not going to like Plan B. I looked at the calendar. Friday was in 2 days. The real show was about to begin. Thursday morning arrived with the drilling crew back at my gate, but this time they weren't alone. The foreman approached me with an embarrassed expression and a check in his hand. Mr. Anderson, I'm real sorry about yesterday. The lady tried to blame us for the flooding, refused to pay, even threatened to sue us for damages, but here's the thing. We documented everything, including her specific instructions to drill along your property line. He handed me the check. This is for the damage to your well system. We'll fix it properly, no charge, and between you and me, we won't be taking any more jobs from Mrs. Whitfield. As they worked to repair the damage, Karen drove by slowly, glaring at us through her window like we were personally responsible for all her life's disappointments. The real entertainment started at 10 a.m. when I was served with legal papers, not just one lawsuit, but 6 separate ones, each more creative than the last. Karen had sued me for intentional infliction of emotional distress, interference with community heritage, monopolistic control of traditional pathways, and my personal favorite, violation of the implied covenant of neighborly conduct. I spent my lunch break reading through them, occasionally laughing out loud at the more ridiculous claims. According to her lawyer, or whoever had written this masterpiece of legal fiction, my gate had caused severe psychological trauma to the entire Willowbrook community and decreased property values by 30% overnight. But the pinnacle of absurdity came with the emergency court hearing scheduled for that very afternoon. Apparently, when you pay lawyers enough, they can make things happen fast. I showed up at the courthouse in my best jeans and a clean button-down, which seemed to offend Karen almost as much as my gate had. She sat at the plaintiff's table in a powers suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, surrounded by 3 lawyers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Judge Harrison, who I'd delivered mail to for 15 years, looked at the stack of paperwork with barely concealed amusement. "So, Mrs. Whitfield," the judge began, adjusting his reading glasses, "you're claiming that Mr. Anderson has committed, let me make sure I'm reading this correctly, agricultural terrorism by installing a gate on his own property." One of Karen's lawyers started to explain the complex legal theory behind this claim, but the judge held up his hand. "Son, I've been on this bench for 25 years. I've seen a lot of creative legal arguments, but trying to turn property rights into terrorism might just take the cake." Karen's face was approaching that familiar tomato shade as she whispered furiously to her legal team. The hearing lasted exactly 17 minutes. Judge Harrison listened patiently as Karen's lawyers presented their arguments, then turned to me. "Mr.
Anderson, do you have anything to add?" I stood up, feeling oddly calm. "Your Honor, I bought my ranch free and clear. I installed a gate on my own property. Mrs. Whitfield is welcome to use the public roads like everyone else."
That's really all there is to it." The judge nodded, shuffled some papers, then delivered his verdict with a completely straight face. "I find no legal merit in any of these claims. Case dismissed. Mrs. Whitfield, if you file any more frivolous lawsuits regarding Mr. Anderson's gate, I'll be considering sanctions." Court adjourned. The sound Karen made as we left the courthouse wasn't quite human. It started as a shriek, morphed into a growl, and ended with her shouting at her lawyers about gross incompetence and demanding refunds. I managed to keep a straight face until I got to my truck, then laughed until my sides hurt. But my amusement was short-lived when I checked my phone and found 17 missed calls from Emma. When I finally reached her, she was breathless with excitement. "Dad, you need to get home right now. Someone just forwarded me a whole bunch of emails from Karen's personal account. This is huge, like FBI-level huge. I broke several traffic laws getting home, my mind racing with possibilities." Emma met me at the door with her laptop practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Look at this," she said, pulling up an email thread that made my jaw drop. The messages laid out in stunning detail, a development deal worth $200 million. Celestial Developments wanted to build a luxury resort and golf course, but they needed both the HOA land and my ranch to make it work. The kicker was Karen's finder's fee, $20 million, if she could deliver both properties by the end of the month. That was 8 days away. The emails got worse the more I read. Karen had been systematically planning this for years, slowly changing HOA bylaws, stacking the board with her supporters, and most damning of all, skimming from the HOA funds to pay for her various schemes against me. There were receipts for the drone, the drilling company, even a private investigator she'd hired to dig up dirt on me. The total came to over $400,000 in misappropriated funds, but the email that really caught my attention was from someone named Richard at Celestial Developments. "Karen, stop calling me at home. We're not married anymore. This is business. Get to the ranch access or the deal is off." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Richard Whitfield, Karen's ex-husband, was the CEO of Celestial Developments. This wasn't just about money, it was personal for Karen. She was trying to prove something to her ex. Maybe to herself, maybe to the world. I almost felt sorry for
Her. Almost. Then I remembered my dead chickens and the flooded entrance to my property, and the sympathy evaporated. Emma had already backed up all the emails to multiple locations. Smart girl that she was. "What do we do now, Dad?" she asked,
looking at me with those serious brown eyes that reminded me so much of her mother. Before I could answer, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a blocked number, but somehow I knew who it would be. "Mr. Anderson." The voice was smooth, professional, with just a hint of Texas drawl. "This is Richard Whitfield. I believe my ex-wife has been causing you some problems. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow to discuss a mutually beneficial solution." I agreed to meet him at the diner in town, Neutral Ground. As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to step into something much bigger than a simple property dispute. The anonymous message had warned me about Plan B happening Friday. Now I was going to have breakfast with the man who might be behind it all. One thing was certain, tomorrow was going to be very interesting. Friday morning came with an unusual chill in the air, the kind that makes Texas ranchers reach for their jackets and check on their stock tanks. I arrived at the diner 15 minutes early, partly out of habit from my mail carrier days, and partly because I wanted to see Richard Whitfield before he saw me. I needn't have bothered with the stealth. The man who walked in at exactly 8 a.m. was impossible to miss. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my truck, Richard Whitfield looked like Central Casting's idea of a Texas
oil executive, but when he spotted me and walked over, his smile seemed genuinely tired rather than calculated.
"Tom, I appreciate you meeting me," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I know this situation with Karen has gotten out of hand." That was like saying a tornado was a bit of wind, but I kept my mouth shut and let him talk. He ordered black coffee, nothing else, and waited until the waitress was out of earshot before continuing. "Let me cut to the chase. Yes, I run Celestial Developments. Yes, we want to build a resort. And yes, Karen inserted herself into this deal in a way that's become problematic for everyone involved." He pulled out a tablet and showed me architectural renderings of the proposed resort. It was impressive, I had to admit. All gleaming glass and natural stone designed to blend with the landscape rather than dominate it. "Here's what you need to understand," Richard continued, his voice dropping to a more confidential tone. "Karen and I divorced 5 years ago. It wasn't amicable. She took me for $15 million in the settlement, but that wasn't enough for her. She's been trying to claw her way back into my business ever since." He swiped to another document on his tablet. 6 months ago, she came to me with a proposal. She claimed she could deliver both the HOA land and your ranch for our development. In exchange, she wanted $20 million. The number still made me whistle, even though I'd seen it in the emails. "The thing is, Tom, we don't actually need your ranch. We have alternate plans that work around it, but Karen doesn't know that." I sat down my coffee cup carefully, processing this information. "So, why hasn't someone told her the deal's off?" Richard's laugh was bitter. "Because she won't listen. She's convinced herself that this is her ticket back to the life she thinks she deserves. She's liquidated her savings, maxed out her credit, even borrowed against her house to fund this campaign against you. In her mind, if she can just force
You to give up that road access. Everything will work out. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something internally. There's more. Karen didn't exactly play fair in our divorce.
She hid assets, created false debts, even forged my signature on several documents. I have proof of all of it, but I never used it. I just wanted to be done with her. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, given everything else Karen had done, but it did add another layer to the picture. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, genuinely curious. Richard met my eyes directly. "Because she's going to destroy herself trying to make this deal happen, and she'll take down anyone in her path. The HOA residents don't deserve that. Hell, you don't deserve that. I'm hoping we can find a solution that stops her before she does something even more desperate." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dad, come home now. Something's
happening." Richard saw my expression change. "Go," he said quickly. "We can finish this later, but Tom, be careful." When Karen feels cornered, she doesn't think rationally. I threw some money on the table and headed for the door, but Richard called after me.
"One more thing. Check your security cameras from this morning. Around 5 a.m. you might find something interesting." I nodded and rushed out, my mind racing with possibilities. The drive home seemed to take forever, even though I was pushing the speed limit. When I finally pulled up to my gate, I saw what had Emma so worried. There were at least 20 people milling around, some in HOA board member shirts, others looking like contractors or officials of some kind. Emma met me at the gate, her face pale with worry. "They showed up about an hour ago. Mrs. Whitfield is telling everyone you agreed to sell the ranch to the HOA. She's got papers and everything." I looked through the gate at the crowd, spotting Karen in the center, waving what looked like official documents and talking animatedly to anyone who would listen. Several people were taking pictures of my property, and I noticed surveying equipment being unloaded from a van. This had to be the plan B everyone had been warning me about. Create such a public spectacle that I'd be forced to deal with her just to make it stop. But I had an ace at my sleeve thanks to Richard's tip. I pulled up my security camera app and scrolled back to 5 a.m. What I saw made everything clear. There was Karen creeping around my gate in the pre-dawn darkness, but she wasn't alone. A man in a suit was with her, and they were clearly arguing. The man kept shaking his head and trying to leave, but Karen grabbed his arm repeatedly. Finally, he shoved a piece of paper at her and stormed off. Karen had stood there for a long moment looking at the paper, then crumpled it up and threw it in my ditch. That paper was probably still there. "Emma, go inside and call Sheriff Mike. Tell him we have a situation involving potential fraud and trespassing. I'm going to go get something." I walked along my fence line until I found the crumpled paper, using a stick to fish it out of the ditch. It was exactly what I'd suspected. A letter from Celestial Development's legal department formally withdrawing from any deal involving my ranch and threatening legal action if Karen continued to use their name in connection with any property transactions. The letter was dated 2 days ago. Everything Karen was doing now was pure desperation theater. When I walked back to the gate, the crowd had grown larger, and Karen was in full performance mode. "This man," she declared, pointing at me dramatically, "is standing in the way of progress. He's denying our community an opportunity worth hundreds of millions of dollars." Someone in the crowd yelled back, "Karen, is it true you spent $400,000 of HOA money on this?" The question hit like a bombshell. Karen's face went white, then red, then a shade I'd never seen before. "Who told you that? That's a lie." "Everything I've done has been for this community, but the damage was done." HOA members started pulling out their phones, checking bank statements, making calls. The situation was spiraling out of control, faster than a dust devil in August. Board members were arguing with each other. Residents were demanding answers. And in the middle of it all, Karen stood frozen, watching her carefully constructed plan fall apart. When Sheriff Mike arrived with 2 deputies, the scene looked like a cross between a protest and a yard sale gone wrong. He took one look at the chaos, sighed deeply, and used his cruiser's PA system. "Folks, I'm going to need everyone who doesn't live here to disperse immediately. HOA members, please move to the community centre for your discussion. Mrs. Whitfield, I need to speak with you privately." As the crowd began to break up, many shooting angry looks at Karen. She turned to stare at me through the gate. For the first time since this all started, she looked defeated. But there was something else in her eyes, too. Something that made me remember Richard's warning about cornered animals. "This isn't over," she said quietly, but with a venom that made the words feel like a physical threat. "You've ruined everything. 20 years of planning, and you've ruined it all." Then she walked, away with Sheriff Mike, her shoulders rigid with barely controlled rage. I had a feeling this was far from over. Karen Whitfield didn't strike me as someone who gave up easily, and desperate people do desperate things. Saturday morning broke with drama that would have been comedic if it wasn't so frustrating. Someone had superglued my gate lock overnight, and I discovered this delightful fact when I tried to leave for a feed store run at 7 a.m. As I stood there with my useless remote, staring at the professionally sabotaged lock, my phone rang. It was Richard Whitfield, and he sounded exhausted. "Tom, we need to talk." Karen's gone completely off the rails. She showed up at my house at 3 a.m., demanding I honor our non-existent deal. My security cameras caught her trying to break into my home office. "I'm filing a restraining order, but that's not going to stop her from coming after you." While I waited for a locksmith, Richard filled me in on the midnight drama. Apparently, Karen had convinced herself that I'd somehow turned Richard against her, that this was all part of some elaborate conspiracy between us. She kept screaming. "About the mailman who ruined her life," Richard said, and I could hear the bewilderment in his voice. Then she said something that made me realize how deep this goes. "Tom, did you deliver her divorce papers 5 years ago?" The memory hit me like a slap. Of course, I had delivered those papers. Remembered it clearly because Karen had screamed at me for 10 minutes about being a messenger of doom. In her twisted logic, I'd been the enemy long before I bought the ranch. The locksmith arrived around 9:30, took one look at the mess, and whistled low. "Professional job," he said, getting out his tools. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. This is automotive-grade adhesive. As he worked, Emma came out with her laptop looking troubled. "Dad, the HOA social media page is going crazy. Apparently, there was an emergency board meeting last night, and things got ugly." She showed me video after video of what looked like a full-scale revolt. HOA members were demanding forensic accounting of their funds. Board members were resigning left and right. And through it all, Karen kept insisting she'd done nothing wrong. The real shock came when Sheriff Mike pulled up just as the locksmith finished. He looked grim as he got out of his cruiser. "Tom, I need to give you a heads up. Karen's filed a complaint saying, you and her ex-husband are conspiring to destroy her life. She's demanding a full investigation." He handed me a copy of her statement, which read like the manifesto of someone losing their grip on reality. According to Karen, I had been planning this for years, had deliberately bought the ranch to block her business deals, and was probably working with foreign interests to destroy American property values. That last part made me laugh despite the situation. "There's more," Mike continued, leaning against his cruiser. We've been getting calls all morning. She's been contacting everyone she knows, trying to organize some kind of last stand for tomorrow. Tom, I can't tell you what to do, but it might be wise to stay somewhere else for a few days. But running wasn't in my nature, never had been. This was my home, bought with honest money and honest sweat. If Karen wanted a last stand, she'd get one. But it wouldn't go the way she planned. I thanked Mike for the warning and went inside to think about my next move. That afternoon, my anonymous source in the HOA sent what would be their final message. Board voted. Karen is out as president, effective immediately. Vote was 89-11. She refused to accept the results, had to be escorted out by security. She kept screaming about coups and traitors. Also, the forensic accountant found way more than 400,000 missing. It's closer to 800,000. Criminal charges are being filed Monday. Watch your back tonight. The numbers were staggering. $800,000 meant Karen had been bleeding the HOA dry for years, probably funding her lifestyle while pretending to be wealthy. As evening approached, I did something I hadn't done since buying the ranch. I loaded my shotgun, not because I planned to use it, but because 24 years of being a mailman in rural Texas had taught me that visible deterrence prevented more trouble.
Then they caused.
Emma saw me checking the shells and bit her lip. "Dad, I'm scared. This feels different." She seems broken. I pulled my daughter into a hug, feeling her tremble slightly. "I know, sweetheart, but we're going to be okay. Sheriff Mike has extra patrols. Tonight. We have our cameras, and I'm not going anywhere." She nodded against my chest, then pulled back with a watery smile. "Mom would be proud of you, you know, for standing up for what's right." That hit me harder than anything else that had happened. Rachel would have handled this whole situation with grace and humor. Probably would have won Karen over with kindness and fresh-baked cookies, but Rachel was gone, and I was doing the best I could with the stubborn streak she'd always teased me about. As darkness fell, I made my rounds, checking gates, testing cameras, making sure everything was secure. The ranch felt different in the dark. Shadows seeming deeper, normal sounds seeming threatening. Even the horses were on edge, pacing in their stalls and snorting at nothing. At exactly 2 a.m., every motion sensor on the property triggered at once. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree with alerts, and Emma came running from her room, eyes wide with fear. I grabbed the shotgun in my phone, pulling up the camera feeds. What I saw made my jaw drop. It wasn't just Karen at my gate. She brought what looked like the remains of her HOA supporters, about 17 people total, and they had bolt cutters, but the real shock was the bulldozer. An actual full-sized bulldozer on a flatbed trailer with someone already climbing into the cab. "Call 911, I told Emma, my voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through my system. "Tell them everything." As she ran for the phone, I stepped out onto the porch, shotgun visible, but pointed at the ground. The floodlights I'd installed lit up the scene like a movie set, and I could see Karen standing by the gate, but something was off. She was wearing what looked like tactical gear, complete with a vest that had security printed on it. In her hand was something I couldn't quite make out, but the way she held it made my blood run cold. This wasn't just desperate anymore, this was dangerous. The floodlights turned night into harsh day, revealing every detail of the surreal scene at my gate. Karen stood at the center of her ragtag army, and now I could see what she held in her trembling hands. It was a gun, or at least it looked like one, in the stark lighting. My mouth went dry as I kept the shotgun low but ready, trying to process how a property dispute had escalated to this point. Behind her, someone had managed to start the bulldozer, its engine rumbling like distant thunder. The 17 people she brought looked less like supporters and more like confused extras in a movie they didn't understand, several already backing away from whatever Karen had planned. Tom Anderson. Karen's voice cracked through the night air, amplified by a portable speaker someone had set up. You've taken everything from me. My reputation, my position, my future, all because you couldn't just let me use a simple road. Her words slurred slightly, and I wondered if she'd been drinking or if this was pure exhaustion and rage. The gun wavered in her grip as she gestured wildly, causing several of her followers to duck instinctively. 20 years I've been building something in this community. 20 years, and you destroyed it in a month. From inside the house, I heard Emma's voice, high and excited. Dad, I'm live streaming the whole thing. I risked a glance back and saw her at the window with her phone, the
Screen showing the scene outside.
The viewer count was already climbing past 10,000. Smart girl, I thought. Whatever happened next, there would be witnesses, lots of them. Looking back at Karen, I kept my voice calm and steady, the same tone I'd used with aggressive dogs during my mail route days. Karen, you need to put the gun down. This isn't worth throwing your life away.
There's still time to walk away from this. Walk away? She laughed, but it was a broken sound, like glass grinding together. Where would I walk to? I'm bankrupt. The HOA is suing me. My ex-husband has a restraining order. Even my daughter won't
talk to me anymore. That last revelation hung in the air like smoke. I hadn't known she had a daughter. And suddenly, some pieces clicked into place. The road she'd been using for 20 years, since her daughter was little. The desperate need to
prove herself successful. The comment about me delivering her divorce papers. This wasn't just about money or power.
This was about a woman watching her life crumble and lashing out at anyone she could blame. Your daughter, I said, taking a careful step forward. What's her name? The question seemed to catch Karen off guard. The gun drooped slightly as confusion crossed her face. What? Why do you care? I kept my voice gentle, like I was talking to a spooked horse, because I'm a father too, and I know what it's like to want to make them proud, to want to give them everything. Sometimes we get so caught up in that we forget what really matters. Behind Karen, I could see flashing lights in the distance. Sheriff Mike and his deputies were coming, but they were being smart, approaching without sirens. Jessica, Karen whispered, and for the first time since this all started, she sounded human. Her name is Jessica. She's 24 now, lives in Austin, says I'm toxic. The gun was pointing at the ground now, forgotten in her hand, as tears started rolling down her face. I just wanted to matter, to be somebody, to show everyone that I wasn't just the divorced woman who got dumped for a younger model. The bulldozer engine cut off abruptly, the driver apparently deciding this wasn't what he'd signed up for. Several more of Karen's supporters were melting away into the darkness. You do matter, Karen, I said. And I meant it. You matter to your daughter even if she's angry right now. You matter to this community even if you've lost your way. But this, I gestured at the scene around us, this isn't who you are. This is just fear and pain making decisions for you. Emma's voice drifted from the house. 50,000 viewers, Dad, the modern world where personal breakdowns became public entertainment. But maybe that was a good thing. Maybe Karen needed to see that her story didn't have to end with handcuffs and hatred. Karen looked around as if seeing the scene for the first time. The bolt cutters dropped from someone's hands with a clang. The tactical vest she wore looked ridiculous now, like a costume that didn't fit. I spent everything, she said, her voice small and lost. Sold my jewelry, maxed out every credit card, borrowed from everyone, all for a deal that was never real. Richard played me just like he did in the divorce. She looked at the gun in her hand with genuine surprise, as if she'd forgotten she was holding it. I bought this to feel safe, to feel strong, but I just feel tired. Then put it down, I said gently. Just set it down and we can figure out the rest. Sheriff Mike and his deputies were out of their vehicles now, positioned carefully, but not aggressively. The live stream view account had hit 75,000, and I could hear Emma reading comments to herself. The whole world was watching Karen Whitfield's worst moment, but also possibly her turning point. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time, not as the enemy who'd ruined her plans, but as a neighbor who'd simply wanted to live in peace. The gun fell from her fingers, and that's when I saw it clearly, for the first time. The orange tip, the water reservoir. It was a water gun. A realistic-looking one, but a water gun nonetheless. The laugh that escaped me was part relief, part disbelief. Karen saw my reaction and looked down, seeming to realize what she'd done. "I ordered it online," she said, her voice hollow. "They sent the wrong one." I was too embarrassed to return it, too proud to admit I couldn't even buy a proper gun. The absurdity of it all, the complete collapse of what had seemed like a dangerous situation into something almost pitifully sad, was overwhelming. Sheriff Mike moved in then, his deputies flanking him. "Karen Whitfield, I'm placing you under arrest for criminal trespass, inciting a riot, theft of HOA funds, and about a dozen other charges we'll sort out at the station." As they cuffed her, Karen looked back at me. "I'm sorry about your chickens," she said, which was such an unexpected thing that I almost laughed again. And the well and everything. They led her away to a cruiser, the remaining supporters scattering like leaves in the wind. The bulldozer sat abandoned, a monument to plans that had spiraled out of control. Emma came running out, still filming. "Dad, the comments are going crazy. Everyone's talking about the water gun." She showed me the screen where thousands of people were reacting in real time to what they'd just witnessed. But I wasn't interested in viral fame. I was thinking about Jessica and Austin, probably watching her mother's breakdown on a phone screen, about Karen, who'd lost herself so completely in the pursuit of wealth and status that she'd forgotten what actually mattered about the damage that desperation and greed could do to a person's soul. 6 months later, I still deliver mail sometimes, just helping out Rodriguez when he needs a vacation day. The gate stays locked, but I had a sign made, "Visitors welcome, please use the front entrance." The HOA disbanded after the financial scandal came to light, and Willowbrook Estates is a quieter, friendlier place. Richard Whitfield's resort got built, just not where he'd originally planned. And Karen, she's serving 3 years in minimum security. But Emma helped me forward a letter to Jessica in Austin. Last I heard, they were talking again. Small steps, because everyone deserves a second chance, even when they show up at your gate at 2 a.m. with 17 people and a water gun. You could always go around, Karen. You always could have just gone around. What did we learn today? Probably nothing.